In Halliburton's narrative, he capitalizes on this metaphor as he constructs his discourse of conquest and conquer in the land of the rising sun, and builds his narration up into a sexy tension that can only be relieved by his successful mounting of the fairy peak, the beguiling queen of mountains, the siren, upon which the gazes of both the Japanese and foreigners converge in agreement that Fujisan, also known as Mount Fuji, is not merely the most beautiful natural object of this island empire, but of this earth. Halliburton is thus tempted by this mountain, saying that in the early morning I happened to glance south, and there rose the haunting siren, pale, proud, majestic. I turned my head away, raised the shade to shut her from view, all in vain. She taunted me even through the curtain. Halliburton is able to resist this taunting, or this state of wonder, only for so long before he is compelled to pull out his ice pick and climb to the snowy peak of the volcano, becoming the first man to ever conquer the blizzard-ravaged mouth of Mount Fuji during the snowy season. Halliburton's narrative ends here with a brief explication of the welcoming reception that he receives, and that his story receives, upon his return to the United States. And he shares when he shares his heroic tale of the defeat of the Japanese landscape, of this incomparable mountain that is the symbol of Japan itself. It almost goes without saying that Halliburton's books and fame as a traveler reached their peak with the American public shortly before and during the years of World War II. In the final text that I want to add to this, Palacio, Sergio Gutierrez Negron, like Halliburton, directly engages with Columbus's discourse. Gutierrez Negron establishes a discursive network of crisscross conversations, of relationships, emails, dreams, songs, and longings, as one of the protagonists of this polyvocal narration searches for his missing wife, who silently left him one morning and their home and fled to Japan, and they're first located in Atlanta. Through the delayed and fragmentary mediations of emails and Skype messages, the reader and the narrator come to understand that this missing wife has been hired to read the diaries of the recently deceased daughter, Katie, of an aging Japanese man. The diaries, written in English, are read aloud by Alice, the wife, who sits alone in the traditional Japanese stone garden at the house of this Japanese man. Alice's voice and the writings of Katie, in turn, are recorded by hundreds of talking parrots that are able to mimic her voice and repeat so many words. This displacement of Katie's voice into the voice of Alice is an act of translation that mimics, and I'm quoting Margarita Zamora, the decisive mediation of Bartolomé de las Casas, who copied, edited, paraphrased, and commented on a significant number of Columbus's writings, some of which survive only in Las Casas' versions. Conversely, the Colombian texts that remain lost today, including the diarios of the second, third, and fourth navigations, are in part unavailable because Las Casas did not transcribe them. Thus, much of our understanding of the discovery, much of what we know of what Columbus thought or said, as well as what we do not, is the result of Las Casas' intervention in the transmission of the Colombian texts. End quote. So knowing this, having this intervention of Las Casas in mind, is not revealed about the life of Katie as mediated by Alice, and also by the meddling hand of Katie's father, this Japanese professor, who one day, as Alice is nearing the final stages of this project of recording, breaks into the space of the garden, and upon hearing the voices of all of these birds, which are mimicking the voices of both Katie and Alice, is driven to destroy not only the diaries, but to also free the birds, which burst out in a blackening cloud of parrots against the sky. This image of the birds against the sky again evokes an image found in Columbus's text, and I quote again, "And the singing of the small birds, it is so marvelous that it seems that a man would never want to leave this place. And there are flocks of parrots that obscure the sun, and birds of so many kinds and sizes, and so different from ours, that it is a marvel." That's Columbus, reacting in his diary. With this image, Gutierrez Negron and the narration in Palacio take up the same elements found in the metaphorical space of this garden. But instead of trying to stay in this place, Gutierrez creates an image that undoes this place, with a gesture that releases the birds that used to make up this paradise, and which may perhaps also be a gesture, that is also a gesture that unravels the narrative embodied within the elements of the garden. To conclude, I want to ask if the narrative in Palacio offers the possibility of the creation of an imaginary where there can be a contemplation or an understanding that is not grasping, not an insertion of an ice pick into the slippery walls of Mount Fuji, nor the thrusting of a sword into the fertile soils of American tierra, but instead an endless undoing, an endless process of letting go, of releasing, that occurs not only at the ends of things, but because of its engagement with the discourse of Columbus, also at the beginnings. Or is this just another projection, a contemporary imaging of the same wonder, merely placed within the structure, the networks, the flight lines of contemporary empire?
Hello, I'm Juan Antonio Del Monte. I'm from Tijuana. I'm doing an MA in Cultural Studies back in TJ with a thesis about bikers and lowriders cultures. So this is part of that thesis. I will point some of my theoretical framework and some preliminary preliminary findings. Excuse me, English is not that good, but I will do my best. Maybe I will read some parts of this. Okay. I will talk to you about the creation and reinforcement of identities through modern machines, which are characterized by territorial mobility. The select unit of analysis for these investigations are biker and lowrider clubs in the city of Tijuana, especially two clubs, Solo Ángeles, Only Angels for English, and Dukes. My hypothesis is that the identity of bikers and lowriders is enhanced upon circulation on the streets. So, Bikers and lowrider in Tijuana. The collectives of bikers and lowriders are two distinct cultural phenomena that in the northern Mexican border are created around motor vehicles. In the city of Tijuana, located in the south side of the border next to San Diego, California, multiple squads of bikers roam the streets every day. United by their huge cruiser motorcycles, wearing bandanas on their heads and the patches of the club on their leather jackets, known the famous colores or colors. The streets are also cruised by slowly by tumbados, lowrider cars, modified to be closer to the floor, proudly showing on the rear window the club plate. Some of them even have hydraulic pumps on their axles so they can jump with cadence while pompously roaming the streets. Okay. The appearance of groups around motor vehicles has been associated with the emergence of juvenile cultures in the 60s. The young, back in the 60s, started to be seen not as a transition between childhood and adulthood, but as having their own action capacities. They begin to be seen at the first and stigmatized as a social problem. The culture industry, such as movies, literature, as well as the press, offered the presentation of problem youngsters that had values different from their parents. There are a lot of movies about bikers and lowriders, like The Wild One, Marlon Brando acting there, Easy Rider of Peter Fonda. Hell's Angels is a famous book written by Hunter Thompson. This one write also Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And for lowriders, there are the famous Zoot Suit riots in LA. So, two particularities of the emergence of juvenile cultures are relevant here: being popular and being iconoclastic. Populist because the likes of the popular and lower urban classes were accepted more and more as a way of taking distance from the rules and values of their parents' generation. The iconoclast character is owed special to the expressivity of their demonstrations, a way of bursting in the public space that did not agree with the behavior patterns of the elder generations. So, lowriders in Tijuana, there are a transborder phenomenon. The consolidation of this phenomena in the city of Tijuana has received a great historical influx by similar practices generated on the northern side of the border. But I like to make a warning here. These practices in Tijuana do not respond to the simple fact of being a border and repeating like a mirror cultural manifestation on the other side of the line. It is to say that influence received from practices on the American side is not of a homogenizing nature, because in the becoming of the group's conformation, a differentiated influence and social and cultural interaction is implied, which carries implicit dynamics of resistance, domination, appropriation, and meanings. So, I understand bikers and lowriders as two cultural phenomena that are distinguishable as an identity and meeting point around a car and a motorcycle that can be cruised about the city of Tijuana. The analysis is framed in the identities and automobility theories that I will make some points, show some points here. So, some ideas for the identities approach. Identities can only be formed from the belonging cultures. I think here about bikers and lowrider cultures. Identities are not an essence. They're not an intrinsic attribute of persons. They are generated in the significant social interactions. So, biker and lowriders' identity are socially created. Identities are historical and situational processes. There are processes, they're not finished process. Bikers and lowriders have a specific historic development, like the movies and the press are very important for this part, but they are also placed in a here and a now that gives them form. That is the Tijuana, in my case, of the beginning of the 21st century. Recognition is a central operation in the construction of identity. In order for the biker and lowriders identities can be achieved and took place in Tijuana society, recognition has to exist from others that interact with it and that also attribute meanings. This is a negotiation between self-membership and exo-membership or exo-identity. In self-membership, individual personality is included in a collective, in a collectivity. This is my personality is included in bikers and lowriders cultures. And exo-membership is characterized in bikers and lowriders in Tijuana as a stigma or a stereotype or prejudice. So, collective identities. This is like a difficult theoretical problem, but I take it like a common perception of a relative homogeneous we-ness, like nosotros, call it in Spanish. And in these biker and lowriders identities, I found like a carnalismo, you know, like a brotherhoodism. I don't know how it is in English. And last but not least, identities imply a dispute. In the deployment of social interactivity, identities are not flat. They involve constant struggle from positions of power. From the use of public space to cruise to the logo they will use to be recognized, biker and lowrider identities are constantly disputing a place in the community. So here comes the other concept that I'm developing, the automobilities. Here's a dimension of a mobilities paradigm, I don't know how to say it. So the essential character of motorized identity of bikers and lowriders is that the sense of belonging is constructed by means of artifacts that are defined by the possibility of movement, motorcycle and cars. Automobility, according to Scheller and Uri, is a complex amalgam of interlocking machines, social practices, and ways of dwelling. Not in a stationary home, but in a mobile, semi-privatized, and hugely dangerous capsule. I will stand in this investigation the concept to bikes, leaving out the idea of being a capsule, which places the trip in motorcycle in a completely different situation as that in a car. Okay, identities. With this, I want to say that identities are mobilizing in the city. So this performating the identity on the street is like a central character in my investigation. So, okay, lowrider cars. These are photos that I took on my field work. I have to say that I made like a couple of months of participant observation with these two clubs. I made 11 in-depth interviews, so this is to frame my the methodological approach of my investigation. Lowriders, I have to say that it's a phenomenon that in its origin is noticeable ethnic. It is associated with the vindications of the Chicano people in the United States. It is also has been seen as a way of resistance to the American automobile culture, especially the hot rods, these altered cars made to run with power. The literature said that while the hot rod expressed "I'm fast and I'm mean," the low rider expressed "I'm slow and I'm cool." So one emphasized power and speed, the other emphasized the show, no? The expressive of his identity. So there is also a continuum in the symbolic expression of the pachucos, the cholos, and the low riders. There's a lot of literature that say this. The Pachuco are characterized for these bicultural references expressed, especially with the language twist from Spanish and English, the tattoos and the famous suit, with ample stacks to dance the boogie and swing, clearly showing a posture in front of the fashion establishment. The cholos are youngsters that had been seen stigmatized as dysfunctional in respect to the dominant social system, delinquent, vagrant, promiscuous, illiterate, drug addicts. are like stigmas or stereotypes of cholos. So, a lowrider car, according to Brenda Bright, this scholar that has dedicated a lot of time in lowriders, said that a lowrider is a Baroque ride considered to be a Chicano aesthetic. It's a Chicano lowers the cars to within a few inches of the ground, makes it beautiful inside and out, and drives very, very slowly. Its main feature is a hydraulic lift system which can rise and lower the car by installing car batteries and hydraulic pumps in the trunks that are connected to lift cylinders at each wheels. For many at this point in the process, the car comes alive. It is now a lowrider. This process of the pumps started back in the 60s as a way of resistance to police. There was this law in California that cars can't be, inches to the ground, so they developed this system to, when a police car is coming, they switch up. So, lowriders in Tijuana. This is the group Duques, where I make my field work, one of them. The Duques Club it has his roots in Tijuana. The lowrider phenomenon in California has its roots in Tijuana. It's interesting. I will read like a short. The Duques Club from Los Angeles is recognized as the oldest lowrider club still in existence. The Ruelas brothers, founders of the club in LA, are from Tijuana. They began as a social club in Tijuana with the name of Duques and turned it into a car club in Los Angeles. They rise as an association alternative to the high society clubs, the Rotary and Lions and Kiwanis and all these. The Dukes Club that exists in Tijuana, these ones, disassociate themselves currently and historically from the involvement of the Los Angeles Duques. So this is like a contradiction that I found in the fieldwork. Even though the club arose in Tijuana when the Ruelas brothers left to LA, the Duques unfolded into two clubs that, aside from having the same name and almost identical logo, is like this hat and similar practice around the cars, the lowriding cars, they not recognized as chapters of one of them. So the other club that I made my fieldwork was a biker club. So speaking of the bikers, the biker has arrived to our days through strongly stereotyped imagery of vandalistic, delinquent, and libertine and corrupt conducts. To speak of biker is not only to talk about how the phenomenon of associating and cruising streets and roads was conformed, but it is also to mention how those social representations, especially in the movies, have linked them to a negative image. Has most effectively been spread in greater social sectors, even having influence with the idea bikers have of themselves. So there's a founding myth in biker cultures, the Hollister incident, they say, is considered a foundational myth in the biker culture. It is an exaggeration of the press about what happened in that town in Hollister, California. Witnesses says that it was only a wild party, but the press says it was a pandemonium in Hollister. There is a very famous picture, this one, shown in Life magazine of a drunk youngster mounted on a bike, pretty inoffensive because of his drunkenness. A totally different biker was characterized by Marlon Brando, that one, in the movie The Wild One, which has been perhaps one of the most important factors for the spreading of the concept of the outlaw biker based on the Hollister incidents. The most famous club that rises under the stigma of danger is the Hells Angel Club. Hunter Thompson, that I say about him, makes an excellent report about them. I will read a little part of this book. The only basic difference between the Hells Angels and other outlaw clubs are that the Angels are in extreme situation. Most of the remaining are part-time outlaws, but the Angels interpret interpret their roles 7 days a week. They show their patches at home, in the street, and sometimes even at work. They take their bikes to buy a quart of milk at the corner store. The angel feels naked and invalid without its colors, like a knight without armor. The last image, a knight without armor, is part of the legacy left by the American and outlaw clubs to the clubs we can find in Tijuana, as the field work experience has shown with the Solo Angeles. These are the bikers that are Solo Angeles, the only angels that I made my field work with them. They are the strongest biker club in Tijuana, the only angels. They are named that way in order to disassociate themselves from the Hells Angels. They say me this. We're not Hells Angels, we're not bad, you know. Although they have the irreverent and fearful attitude of the biker. Especially him. Like a story. The first time that I came with the bikers, they said to me, "Go out, man. We don't want to talk with you." They were drunk, right? I didn't notice. So the second time, I came closer to them at the day with my ID. I'm Juan, and I will make an investigation of you. Oh, come on! And it was this guy. Like, it's like a two-faced guy. So, although they have the irreverent and fearful attitude of the biker, this club is special in showing a philanthropist face in Tijuana society.
In Halliburton's narrative, he capitalizes on this metaphor as he constructs his discourse of conquest and conquer in the land of the rising sun and builds his narration up into a sexy tension that can only be relieved by his successful mounting of the fairy peak, the beguiling queen of mountains, the siren, upon which the gazes of both the Japanese and foreigners converge in agreement that Fujisan, also known as Mount Fuji, is not merely the most beautiful natural object of this island empire, but of this earth. Halliburton is thus tempted by this mountain, saying that in the early morning I happened to glance south, and there rose the haunting siren, pale, proud, majestic. I turned my head away, raised the shade to shut her from view, and fame as a traveler reached their peak with the American public shortly before and during the years of World War II. In the final text that I want to add to this, Palacio, Sergio Gutierrez Negron, like Halliburton, directly engages with Columbus's discourse. Gutierrez Negron establishes a discursive network of crisscross conversations, of relationships, emails, dreams, songs, and longings. As one of the protagonists of this polyvocal narration searches for his missing wife, who silently left him one morning and their home and fled to Japan. This displacement of Katie's voice into the voice of Alice is an act of translation that mimics, and I'm quoting Margarita Zamora, the decisive mediation of Bartolomé de las Casas, who copied, edited, paraphrased, and commented on a significant number of Columbus's writings, some of which survive only in Las Casas' versions. Conversely, the Colombian texts that remain lost today, including the diarios of the second, third, and fourth navigations, are in part unavailable because Las Casas did not transcribe them. Thus, much of our understanding of the discovery, much of what we know of what Columbus thought or said, as well as what we do not, is the result of Las Casas' intervention in the transmission of the Colombian texts. End quote. And they're first located in Atlanta. Due to the delayed and fragmentary mediations of emails and Skype messages, the reader and the narrator come to hired to read the diaries of the recently deceased daughter, Katie, of an aging Japanese man. The diaries, written in English, are read aloud by Alice, the wife, who sits alone in the traditional Japanese stone garden at the house of this Japanese man. Alice's voice and the writings of Katie, in turn, are recorded by hundreds of talking parrots that are able to mimic her voice and repeat so many words, all in vain. She taunted me even through the curtain. Halliburton is able to resist this taunting, or this state of wonder, only for so long before he is compelled to pull out his ice pick and climb to the snowy peak of the volcano, becoming the first man to ever conquer the blizzard-ravaged mouth of Mount Fuji during the snowy season. Halliburton's narrative ends here with a brief explication of the welcoming reception that he receives, and that his story receives, upon his return to the United States. And he shares when he shares his heroic tale of the defeat of the Japanese landscape, of this incomparable mountain that is the symbol of Japan itself. It almost goes without saying that Halliburton's books